Thank you for coming. Hello and welcome to today's Textile Talk. It's February 10th, 2021. My name is Nancy Bavor, and I'm the director at the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. And today I'm delighted to introduce the presentation, Creating Continuity with Joe Cunningham. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, Textile Talks is a weekly virtual lecture series presented by 6 different fiber art organizations each Wednesday. And they include Studio Art Quilt Associates, the International Quilt Museum, Surface Design Association, the Modern Quilt Guild, the Quilt Alliance, and the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. Today's presentation and Q&A session will last about an hour. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can submit it in the Q&A area on your screen, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. We are proud to be supported by the following organizations. There we go, and businesses who make it possible for us to offer this free weekly lecture series without charge. Thank you to Aurifil, Handy Quilter, The Quilt Show, Misty Fuse, Artistic Artifacts, Schiffer Publishing, eQuilter, Motive Fabrics and Supplies, 9 Patch Fabrics, Empty Spool Seminars, Quiltmania, C&T Publishing. Thank you. And of course, if you'd like to make a donation to the sponsoring organization, your gifts would be most appreciated. So I'd like to just take a moment to share some of the upcoming events we have at the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles this spring. In March, we'll have workshops on natural dyeing with our artist in residence, Carolyn Cuevas, and a wonderful quilting workshop with today's guest speaker, Joe Cunningham, which I'm sure he'll want to talk about more at the end of his presentation. I have signed up for it and I have my fat quarters already. I'm so excited, I can't wait. And in April, we'll also have classes on designing and selling your own fabric with Becca Ron and promoting your artwork on social media with Stephen Wagner. So I hope you'll have a chance to take some of these workshops. We're really excited to be able to offer these to everybody around the world. We also have a reverse applique class with Sheng Luo. And to learn more about these, you can go right to our website, and we'll put the link right in the chat also to make it easy for you. And now I'm really delighted to introduce today's speaker, my friend Joe Cunningham, who will be giving us a studio tour and discussing his quilt making philosophy and creative influences. Joe has been a professional quilt artist since 1979. He has written essays on the subject for museum catalogs, books, and magazines. And his 10 books on quilt making include the first biography of a living quilter, the first book on men who make quilts, which is Men and the Art of Quiltmaking, and a definitive book on marking quilts for quilting called Quilting with Style, published by American Quilter Society. His latest book is Man Made Quilts, From the Civil War to the Present, and it was a catalog for the show of the same name at the Shelburne Museum. He has been seen on the Peabody Award-winning PBS series, Craft in America, which you can, I think, now stream from Netflix or Amazon. The HGTV series, Simply Quilts with Alex Anderson, as well as the Quilt Show with Ricky Timms and Alex Anderson, and many others. His quilts are in the permanent collections of the DeYoung Museum here in San Francisco, the Shelburne Museum, the Newark Museum, the International Quilt Museum, and I'm happy to say the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, and many private collections. So we are delighted to have him here to share more, and take it away, Joe.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you to everyone in the sponsoring organizations that have put this whole series together. It's just fantastic. And it's an honor to be associated with it. A couple months ago, I was lucky enough to find a new workspace. My studio I needed to move out of, and I needed to find a new studio. And because of the fortunate, for me, collapse of rents in San Francisco, I was able to rent here on Market Street a former art gallery. And I get to put my own quilts on the walls, like this one behind me. I get to put anything I want on the walls. Eventually, I'll be having shows by other quilt makers, maybe even other artists of some kind, who knows. This is one of my recent quilts here. And we're just going to briefly look around the gallery, and then we'll go do a brief studio tour. So as you can see, I'm right here on Market Street. It's used to be an art gallery. It's a storefront building right at 1803 Market. I'm never going to run this as a store. I'm going to just be appointment only. But I'll be able to have openings, and we'll have wine, cheese, and crackers at these opening parties. That's what's going to make mine special. Quilts on the walls. Here's one called New York Beauty. Here's one called You Are Here. If there's time, I can go around and talk about these a little bit more, but I just wanted to give a studio tour for the starters, and to demonstrate that I am the luckiest person in the world. Here's my long arm. I use a handy quilter, computerized long arm to do a lot of my quilting. I program the designs in. Sometimes I operate it freehand. Sometimes I quilt by hand. I have a quilt storage unit that I built here, designed by my friend Oliver DeChico, that my son Dorian and I put together. It's just a few 2x4s and electrical conduit, all from the builder's supply, and it's on wheels so that I can store 24 quilts hung out flat like this and take them off individually to show. I love my quilt storage A-frame there. This is where eventually my studio assistant will be sitting. You can put an imaginary person back there. They'll be the ones that come in and organize my whole life. Won't that be great? Here's my latest quilt. This one is called Ghost Locomotive. Oh, and right beside it, Dorian, if you come over this way, Dorian is my cameraman on this shoot here. You can see these are some of the sample blocks that I've made for the E Pluribus Quilt workshop that I'm going to be doing in March at the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. So we're going to be taking this Tin Man block, doing it freehand, all freehand, no pattern pieces or anything, cutting and sewing and making a wide range of diverse people of shapes and sizes and genders. That's all on my white design wall here. And then back here in my studio, in my workroom, I have my whole setup here. My custom-made 4 feet by 8 foot cutting table. My new favorite tool, an 8-foot ruler that I can run my rotary cutter along and trim up my quilt tops and square them up. My sewing machine, I can cut here, I sew here, and then I have my iron over here in one of those with the steam coming out of the hose, with my library, which thanks to my friend Joshua Raoul Brody has been alphabetized. So now I'll be able to find the books that I'm looking for. This will be a totally new thing to me. Back this way, a couple more rooms. I said I was the luckiest guy in the world. Can you imagine having this much space to work in? I have a studio, utility room with my important tea kettle there. And here's my storage area with over here, my own quilts, old quilts I've made, stacked up, antique quilts, quilts and quilt tops, my collection of international textiles, oil paintings that I collect so that I can cut them up and put them into quilts. That's in honor of all the people who cut up quilts and make other things out of them. Here I have my miscellaneous storage unit here, miscellaneous storage here, and then fabric storage here. People wonder always, how much fabric do I have? Well, this is it. And these are all sorted, these fabrics, into um, a certain uh, system that keeps them organized. In here are this is where I keep the hundreds and hundreds of copies of my famous book, Men and the Art of Quiltmaking. Here, lots and lots of copies of that. Even though it was extremely popular, it's a very interesting subject. Uh, and um, uh, it continues to sit there in my closet. All right, we're back here. This is on my dark design wall. I have one design wall is white, one is black, depending on the color of the quilt. I put either one in here, the quilt that I'm working on. Got the camera stationary now. Here's what I wanted to talk about. People often wonder how I came to make such crazy looking quilts. What I can't understand is that the idea that my quilts seem so crazy. And here's why. Um, uh, as most of you who are watching probably know, the roots of our American quilt tradition are in Europe, and especially in England. And in England in 1600s and 1700s, when quilts were made, it was by professional tailors or quilters who were then hired by the wealthy people that could afford the idiotic amount of labor involved in making a hand-quilted quilt. Um, and that was the tradition that we inherited in this country, except that there was no tailor class in the late 1700s when, I mean, there were some tailors, of course, but we didn't have the infrastructure to do this kind of thing. So the wealthy women on the East Coast that wanted to imitate the quilt styles of their European forebears, I imagine, showed them to their servants and slaves and asked them to make the same sort of thing, or taught them to. I don't know exactly how the tradition was transmitted, but what we inherited were a few different strategies. The medallion quilt, the strippy quilt, the whole cloth quilt, strategies for making quilts. Around 1800, that was the ones that were made, that's what they looked like. By 1840 or so, there had been this explosion, this big bang of creativity that happened, where American women almost universally took up this new fashion for quilt making. They made, they invented the block style of quilt. And once they invented the block style, they invented the many other ways of setting the blocks together. And then they made it possible to make a quilt look like anything you could conceive. And the reason for that, I believe, there are many reasons, but the primary reason was that, like I said, in Europe, it was a commercial venture to make quilts. But here in the United States, women who had formerly uh, lived in strict confinement, well, they were still confined by law and custom to the domestic sphere. They could not participate in civic life or business life and could only own the domestic sphere, like I say, which was very confining. The work that, let me mansplain, as my wife has pointed out, what a woman's life was like back then in the olden days. Back then, women had to do everything. They had to raise the food. They had to prepare the food. They had to make the babies, raise the babies, take care of the kids, make the clothes. It was hard, isolating, and back-breaking work. And along comes this fashion for quilted bed covers. And now that's really hard work. What you have to do, you sit there in a chair in front of this quilt frame and you do this for hours on end. That's hard work. Sometimes with other women sitting around the frame. all doing this kind of hard work. And uh, for some reason, this fashion for hand quilting caught on. And what the innovation was that American women came up with was they changed the definition of what a quilt was. Instead of a commercial item, it would now be a gift. This was, who knows how this whole idea got started. It would be a gift. This is built into the DNA of the American quilt, from my point of view. A gift made by a woman for somebody that she loves or for charity. Now, once it became a gift and not a commercial item, that changed the whole game, because that meant that what could it look like? Anything you could think of. That's what it could look like. Anything you could conceive. Uh, the idea of the gift is the important thing. What it looks like, well, it could look like anything. No, the recipient generally is not going to get this quilt and say, I was hoping for more yellow down here in the corner. That's not what happens. They say, thank you for doing this fantastic amount of great labor for me. When I learned how to quilt from old ladies starting in 1979 and forward, what I learned from them was what traditional quilts looked like. Their idea of a traditional quilt was basically something that looked like a quilt kit. Symmetrical blocks, symmetrically laid out with engineered borders in pleasing colors, was what we thought of as traditional. When they saw quilts like this one behind me, my mentor, Mary Schaefer, you could almost hear the what? When she would see a quilt like this, she said, well, that's just a utility quilt. As if a utility quilt, a quilt made to be used, had no significance of any kind. Mary's thinking about it, and many people's thinking was in the 70s, because these quilts had no economic value, they were not the collectible ones. These kind of quilts had no value. They were not widely published except by certain publishers, like I can think of my friend Roderick Kirikoff in early quilt digests that put some really super cool utility quilts in there. But for the most part, they were not widely appreciated by the quilt elders, and economically they were so cheap even I could buy them. This strain in the American quilt making tradition, the strain of the totally free-form quilt, was little appreciated until, until we could get into that. Especially the Gee's Bend shows started changing people's minds, and young people coming into the business had a whole different set of reference points than people of my generation and above. So, but what I wanted to point out is that these were the kind of quilts that I adored from the time I started learning about them. This one was a gift to me from my friend Julie Silber. She knows what I like. Some of the fabrics here are from the 1890s. Some of the fabrics could be as late as, oh, who knows, 1910, 1920 perhaps. But what you can see what it is, some of these were, I'm pretty sure, were clothing scraps, right? These pieces that used to be, or that come from some kind of clothing scraps. This is put together in a very, very free way with blocks. Here's one block. Here's another block. Here's another block. And then along here is some leftover string blocks from an earlier era. These are all from the 1890s, these little string blocks here. Now, what when you see a quilt like this, what does that tell you about the quilt tradition? That tells you about the actual tradition. When we talk about traditional quilts, here's tradition. It's right here. What could a traditional quilt look like? Anything you could conceive of, anything that you wanted it to look like. Now, most women in the 19th century, because it was a gift, men were not a part of it. The idea of it being a gift economy, in fact, warded off the attention of men, which meant that it was an entirely female realm, which meant that the women who developed quilts and made quilts were free to make things look any way they wanted. So quilts like this. But most women made quilts the way their neighbors did, the way their female relatives did. They made quilts like everybody around them, for the most part. Of course they did, which meant block style quilts. Here's a quilt on loan to me for a couple weeks from my friend Julie Silber. She's loaned this to me to use for my upcoming workshop, Borders Without Borders. So as you can see, this is a fairly standard kind of an oak leaf block, but it has this rosette in between the oak leaves. What do we know about this woman that made this quilt? Nothing, except that she sure liked applique, huh? She sure liked applique. Look at that. And this border is appliqued, straight tape cut off from these fabrics and appliqued down, all by machine, I believe. Yeah, appliqued by machine. Hand quilted. This is hand appliqued. But this is the kind of creativity that you usually see, is where it's not totally free form like the previous block. It uses you know, figures from the standard figures in the quilt making world, but she doubles them up here. And then she invents this border, this incredible mock plaid kind of border. Who even knew this sort of thing was possible? As far as this is a one of a kind thing, as far as I know. She just thought it up and did it, which is totally possible. Here's another one that's this one's in my collection of highly valuable quilt tops. You don't see them like this very often. This quilt top set me back over $30. String pieced, you can see the structure here. Along this side, it's all these rectangles that she put together in a brick wall style to make the quilt longer, I guess, because all of the rest of it is string blocks and these little pinwheels, little hourglass shapes. Those last for this whole row. And here's another one. And then the hell with it. Then she switches to the fans. And here's some of these really very cool experimental fans. Oh, she gets tired of that. And then it sort of devolves into a whole other set of things at the bottom. So here is this quilt top that looked like something that came out of her head, that has antecedents, that has in the quilt world, of course it does. It's made out of blocks. You can see these are all individual rectangular blocks, right? It's not just humble jumble. These are all rectangles, this particular size. The great thing about the block style, as you know, is you can just sit there in a chair and create these things and work with them without having a big workroom. That was a great innovation. Get the idea? This is the idea that excited me when I started making quilts, was the idea that oh, well, it could look like anything. You mean it's sort of like art in that way? Well, it is. So taking my cue from the actual tradition, not from what my mentor, Mary Schaefer, thought was a traditional quilt, but from the actual tradition, I have taken off and make things that look like anything I can conceive of. Um, like, uh, here's one I made a few years ago. Uh, Remember when digital photography came out and we got digital cameras, even before they were on our phones? You could take pictures of anything. You didn't have to go to Walgreens to have the pictures developed or wherever you went. Um, Send them away. I went crazy photographing the patches of tar on the highway where there's cracks in the road, in the concrete, and the county sends somebody around with a 4-inch tar brush, and they brush that repair stuff on the cracks. Well, I think that looks like calligraphy a lot of times, and so I started taking pictures of it, and I wanted to print those out individually on from my inkjet printer, but I couldn't get the real black. So I contracted with a friend of mine who does embroidery here in San Francisco to embroider these. Dorian, if you could come up close, you could see I love the digital technology. Look at this, the edges of these tar patches all get to be expressed here in the embroidery. This black thread makes it look really, really black. And then to contrast with the color design, the black and white design here, uh, and taking my cue from antique quilts, where if you look at the back of the quilt, you'll often see that the quilting has nothing to do with the piecing or the applique. In our modern world, very often we use the quilting to reinforce the color design. Well, old time quilt makers didn't necessarily do that at all. Sometimes they did, but lots of times they would have the quilting go right across the piecing and the applique. So I used the quilting here to just go right across it. And what I did was, I thought, what's the opposite of the tar patches? Oh, I know, a glorious 16th century engraving by um, Alric Durer from his Apocalypse series. This one is called Saint Michael Slays the Dragon. And you can see Saint Michael putting down the rebellion from hell. He's up here in heaven and using his spear to slay the dragon down here. There's other monsters throughout, and other angels. Here's one. Here's an angel here. You can see he has his sword, and he's not afraid to use it on other monsters that are trying to invade heaven. Usually my quilts have titles. This one is untitled. I didn't know what to call it. But that's um, but that's basically how I arrived at my aesthetic, was using the idea of infinite creative freedom bequeathed to us by our foremothers in this quilt world. I noticed that my friend Rod Kirikoff is in the group here today. Hi, Rod. He published a book called Unconventional and Unexpected, Unexpected and Unconventional, or something like that. And at the time, I asked Rod to have coffee with me so that I could explain to him that his book was inaccurately titled, that it's all expected. There's nothing unexpected about freely made quilts. It's a big river that runs through our quilt tradition. It's just a river that has not been as widely exploited and appreciated as other rivers of design that go through our quilt tradition. I think I'm at this point going to turn it over to Nancy and see if I have left a trail of unanswered questions.
Well, not exactly a trail, but yeah, thank you. That was very entertaining. There've been some interesting comments in the chats.
Uh-huh.
Um, so all of you here today have heard that Joe's a quilt artist, somewhat a quilt historian, and clearly an entertainer. Um, but what you may not know is that from the age of 15, he started playing guitar in a nightclub, which he did professionally for 15 years. That's how he supported himself. And he has a surprise for everybody today. So he's going to play a song for us. And that was not on the agenda, but he agreed to do it anyway. And so take it away, Joe. Talk a little bit about your music and what you're going to sing for us today.
Uh, I'm going to sing an old song for you by Marvin Gaye because uh, it seems like this song gets more timely every year. Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. And brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know, we got to find a way to bring some loving here today. And Father, Father, there's no need to escalate. War is not the answer. Only love can conquer hate. You know we got to find a way to bring some understanding here today. Picket signs and picket lines don't punish me with brutality. Talk to me and we can see, yeah, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Mother, mother, everybody thinks we're wrong. Oh, but who are they to judge us just because our hair is long? You know we got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Picket signs, picket lines, don't punish me with brutality. And talk with me and we can see, yeah, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?
Yay, thank you. Yay.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joe. I know that was a little impromptu. So there have been some comments about the video. So if you could move a little closer to the camera so you're a little clearer, that would be great while we talk. So just a few questions. You know, you mentioned that you kind of came to quilting through traditional historic quilts. Was your transition to original contemporary designs an aha moment or more of an evolution?
It was an evolution. Even when I came out here to San Francisco 26 or 7 years ago, when I'd been making quilts for a living for a long time, I still labored when people would say, well, your quilts look like art. And I would be very careful to explain to them, no, it's not art. It's not art. No, I'm a quilt maker. Quillers, we use community patterns, and it's not art. It's a whole separate thing. The hell with art. Art doesn't need us, and we don't need it. And I had all kinds of defenses against being called an artist. And then at a certain point, I just realized that uh, what I was doing was living out my long-standing fantasy of being an artist. And quilts allowed me to sort of back into it, since apparently I didn't have the guts to say that I was an artist when I was young. When I was in high school, I wanted to be an artist. I drew constantly, and I was a terrible draftsman. And my art teacher explained to me I had no talent for art, and I should give it up. And so I just thought for a long time that, well, I can appreciate art, I can study it, I can go to the museums, I can read the biographies of quilters and all of that sort of stuff without, I don't have to be, I'm a guitar player, that's an artist, right? I'm a musician. And so I finally realized that making quilts, since I didn't have to commit to the idea of being an artist when I got started. In fact, I could avoid it entirely. Making quilts allowed me to back into um, uh, the whole idea of becoming an artist. I could show you real quick the quilt that changed everything for me.
That would be
I'm gonna
great.
go grab it. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right.
I started making, I started using um, uh, bias tape on my quilts. Now you could back it up again, Dorian. I started using bias tape around, well, around the turn of the century. And I decided that what I would do is, after I did put that on one or two quilts, what I would do is I would do a conceptual art piece. I would gather all of the bias tape that I could find in 1 month and use that to make a quilt, however much or little it was. It turned out I didn't find very much. And so I just laid it out there on this piece of toile de Jouy in a way that looked pleasing to me, and took a picture of it, and then reproduced that by sewing the bias tape down. And this was what I came up with. And I, uh, I thought it was the greatest quilt ever made. Uh, and I still love it. And recently I hung it up at home, and my wife passed it by several times without comment. And I said, "Hey, honey, did you know? Did you notice I put that quilt that you always liked so much up on the wall?" And she looked at it and then just looked away and kept walking. Uh, but
Your best critic.
yeah, the International Quilt Museum, the director, Leslie, was at my studio recently, last year before the pandemic, and asked me if I had an AHA quilt, and I showed her this, and she wanted to know if they could buy it. So at some point, this will be in the collection of the International Quilt Museum, I hope.
And what does your wife think about that? Just kidding. Don't answer that. Don't
Yeah,
answer that. We're
yeah,
being
oh, yeah,
recorded.
yeah. Oh no, she did. She said, if you can sell that, more power to you.
So how many were in your bias tape series? I do remember you asking for people to send you bias tape, and you got several hundreds of miles. Don't send any, people. Don't send any.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think you have enough to last several lifetimes, or did you use a lot of it?
Oh no, I have enough to last several lifetimes. Plus, I've given so much away. My friend Katie Pasquini Massapust up in Fortuna, California, made I don't know, thousands of masks, and she asked me to use to send her bias tape to use if I had any to spare, to use for the masks. Like we did the same style. I just wear my mask around my neck all the time.
Right.
And so I've sent her boxes and boxes. I've sent other people boxes of bias tape. And so now I'm down pretty low. But lately I've started using homemade. I just made a whole bunch the other day to add to my quilt that I'm working on that didn't have enough on it. I make a lot of bias, and I use it in almost every one of my quilts. So I don't know, in my series, I don't think of it as a single series. It's just a technique that I use. And I've done dozens and dozens of quilts with bias tape on them.
Great. And I think your long arm machine was another transformational change to
Yeah,
your work. And you've covered up that amazing quilting on the quilt behind with the
yeah.
tar lines. Can you talk a little bit about how that has changed your working style?
Yes.
Because I mean,
Uh,
you're known for your hand quilting. I mean, that's,
uh,
you know,
that was the first thing that I learned how to do, was to hand quilt, and it's still the thing that I love the most to do, is hand quilting. I feel like I can hand quilt anything, and I can imitate any kind of style. I can imitate English hand quilting. I can imitate the old-fashioned Welsh designs. I can imitate anybody's feathers. I can imitate. And when I went to Gee's Bend and visited the ladies there and started quilting along with them, I could imitate their stitches and their styles. So I feel like I can do anything with hand quilting that I want to do. But what happened was, in the late 80s, after Harriet Hargrave uh, uh, popularized the idea that you could do heirloom quilting designs on your domestic machine. And that was along with the rise of the long arm machine, the interest in my hand quilting classes plummeted for some reason. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to, in the early 90s or the mid 90s probably, I should learn how to operate one of these long arm machines. And so I did, and I did stuff like this, where I just scribbled. I just scribbled on top of my quilt top. I did that on a lot of quilts, uh, and then I heard about this thing, this called a computerized long arm, which was like basically a sewing robot that could sew anything. And you know what? I'm going to go and grab one more quilt. Dorian, would you take this one down? I can keep talking. And so I got the software. I thought, hey, I could figure out how to, uh, let me grab this quilt. Yeah. I could figure out how to program one of these machines. A lot of people dumber than me have done that. Uh, I'm going to, so I bought the software, and I had this idea. What I wanted to do was to uh, do a whole cloth quilt. But the software thought that you were going to be doing blocks and borders. And so the way it would, oh, here. So the way it would work would be, you could program in the size of the blocks. Here you go. And here, let me grab this side. You could program in the size of the blocks that you want and the size of the border, and it would calculate everything and figure out the quilting design for you, and then run the machine. It's not what I wanted. I wanted to do a whole cloth quilt that would be like one big picture. So what I ended up doing was designing uh, this picture of a tree in front of a house from a photograph that I'd taken. I wanted to call it "Nature Always Wins." Here's a big fancy house, and here's this tree. So um, I programmed 130 7.5-inch blocks, and I thought, what's going to happen? Yeah, go ahead and give like a tour of this. What's going to happen is I'm going to get this thing designed, and then I can email it to a quilter. They'll quilt it for me, and then send it back, and I'll get my quilt in the mail. That'll be so cool. And then it turned out that um, nobody was interested in doing that. And I started talking to everybody that I could find in the business that could help me. And finally, Brenda Grells at Handy Quilter got in touch with me, and she said, "What are you trying to do?" And I sent her the files and said, "Here's the picture." I said, "Here's what I'm trying to do." And she wrote back, and I love that woman so much. She said, "This is genius. Why don't you come up to Salt Lake City and be my artist in residence, and I'll give you my best machine and 4 technicians for a week. Do you think you could do the quilt in that period of time?" And I said, "Yes."
All right.
I
Wow.
lied. I lied.
Oh,
And but I did. Saturday morning, I got there Monday morning, and Saturday morning I finished up this quilt. And and it changed. This changed my whole idea, because people use this computerized quilting machine to do things that look like a robot did them, right? To make it ever more perfect and symmetrical. I wanted to make it look like ever more human, like a drawing that a human being had drawn. That was what I wanted to do, and that's what I've continued to do. So my quilting designs are all, I design a new grid for every single quilt, and it's always a significant part of the quilt, even if you can't see it or understand it when you see the finished piece.
thank you. No, this is, I've seen this. I'm glad to say the museum has exhibited this quilt, and it's wonderful. It's stellar to look at. Um,
Thanks.
so one of the questions was, does some of your passion for teaching and creative come from that experience with that one teacher who said you should give up art?
Uh, well, sure, sure. You know, my feeling about teaching is that there's altogether too much of that sort of thing. There's too many teachers that tell you how it's ought to be done, how it should be done, and here we are. We're part of this glorious tradition where we can do anything that we can conceive of, anything we can think of, we can do. And so I'm see myself as an encourager. I want to encourage people to go in the direction that they go in. By the way, my first real life teaching job this year is going to be August 2nd at Madeline Island School of Art. And I'm getting my vaccination this afternoon, and I'm hoping that this will actually happen in August at the Madeline Island School of Art. So anyway, yes, I'm an encourager.
Yeah,
I'm.
you are, yeah, enthusiastic is kind of an understatement, I think. One more question. What are you working on now? What are you working on now?
Oh, well, here's what I'm working on now. I was working on it. I did a lecture this morning for the calico cutters in outside of Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. Yeah, would you put that up? Here's what I'm working on now. It's upside down. Oh no, it's upside down. It doesn't make any sense if you look at it that way.
So while you're hanging that, do you plan the general outline of that quilt in advance, do a little drawing before, or is it totally intuitive work as you do it as you go?
I don't do drawings. I work directly with the fabric. I have an idea before I get started of what I'm trying to accomplish. This one, it's going to be called Sacrifice. I was just reading about the Trojan War and how many sacrifices there were ordered in there, and how unnecessary they all were. And this one is going to be called Sacrifice. So I knew I wanted to make a quilt about that, and I had a general idea, and I started cutting and sewing, and that's how I work. I put enough bias tape on here. I made this all uh, with fabrics that my friend John Carden sent me, and I thought it was going to be enough, and it's not. So then I made a whole bunch again, and I'm going to double it up on this side.
All right.
That's what I'm working on now.
Okay. All right. So I have one more question. What question has not been asked that you want to answer for us? Is there something you want to tell us that hasn't been asked?
Uh, well, um,
Or was it in your song?
no, I mean, I talk about myself so much, and I tell my story so often that I forget what I've said and what I haven't said. But what I want to say is that I feel like the luckiest guy in the world because I ended up in this thing. You know, without quilt making being part of the academy, without it being part of the economy, it had the opportunity to be this realm of freedom So people that were confined otherwise could find slaves who were brought here by the millions from Africa to, at least over a million, to do the free labor for us, to pick the cotton that turned out to be the perfect fabric for quilts, right?
Mhm.
Even a slave could be free in her mind when she was working on a quilt. And to me, it's this idea is almost holy, that it's our obligation. I started out, okay, just a little bit. I started out being taught what was traditional, and that it was it was like this box that you had to stay inside. And when I finally realized the extent of what this realm of quilt making encompassed, uh, I stopped trying to imitate. I learned by copying old quilts and imitating old quilt styles. And I thought that was honoring the past. But I realized to really honor the past, what I'm really doing, if I really want to honor the past, is to do what they did, which is to strike off and do stuff that comes from my heart and do stuff that's only mine alone. And like I say, I see it, it's a calling, and it's almost holy work for us to do as quilters, is to enjoy and to exploit the possibilities.
Well done, well said. Thank you, Joe. I have had actually a couple of questions asked me about the quilt behind me. This is a work from 1985 by the artist Pamela Studstill. And although you can't really see it very well, much of all the lines are painted. They're not pieced, but it looks like it's a lot of striped fabric, but it's all hand painted. Pamela Studstill, Studstill. Look her up. She is amazing. Thank you so much, Joe. I really enjoyed the presentation today. And as I said, I have my fat quarters ready for your workshop. So if you want to be inspired again, go to our website and sign up for the class. It'll be fun and entertaining to boot, and maybe even a little bit of controversy. I don't know. There is still room for you to sign up, and it is a fundraiser for the museum as well. So you'll be helping an artist and you'll be helping the museum. I want to also thank our sponsors again, and we're going to put up their slide to thank all of them. We will be sharing this presentation on YouTube and Facebook afterwards. So if you enjoyed it and you'd like to donate or become a member to one of the presenting organizations, that would be great. Visit our website, sjquiltmuseum.org. And please join us next Wednesday for our presentation with the Modern Quilt Guild. And we look forward to seeing you then, and take care. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye-bye.